Ivanhoe, a Romance by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 2. A monk there was, a fair for the maestry, an outrider that loved venery, a manly man to be an abbot able. Full many a dainty horse had he in stable, and when he rode men might his bridle hear, jingling in a whistling wind as clear, and eke as loud as doth the chapel bell, there as this lord was keeper of the cell. Chaucer. Notwithstanding the occasional exhortation and chiding of his companion, the noise of the horsemen's feet continuing to approach, Wamba could not be prevented from lingering occasionally on the road upon every pretence which occurred, now catching from the hazel a cluster of half-ripe nuts, and now turning his head to leer after a cottage maiden who crossed their path. The horsemen, therefore, soon overtook them on the road. Their numbers amounted to 10 men, of whom the 2 who rode foremost seemed to be persons of considerable importance, and the others their attendants. It was not difficult to ascertain the condition and character of one of these personages. He was obviously an ecclesiastic of high rank. His dress was that of a Cistercian monk, but composed of materials much finer than those which the rule of that order admitted. His mantle and hood were of the best Flanders cloth, and fell in ample and not ungraceful folds around a handsome, though somewhat corpulent person. His countenance bore as little the marks of self-denial as his habit indicated contempt of worldly splendor. His features might have been called good, had there not lurked under the penthouse of his eye that sly Epicurean twinkle which indicates the cautious voluptuary. In other respects, his profession and situation had taught him a ready command over his countenance, which he could contract at pleasure into solemnity, although its natural expression was that of good-humored social indulgence. The defiance of conventional rules and the edicts of popes and councils, the sleeves of this dignitary were lined and turned up with rich furs, his mantle secured at the throat with a golden clasp, and the whole dress proper to his order, as much refined upon and ornamented as that of a Quaker beauty of the present day, who, while she retained the garb and costume of her sect, continues to give to its simplicity, by the choice of materials and the mode of disposing them, a certain air of coquettish attraction, savoring but too much of the vanities of the world. This worthy churchman rode upon a well-fed ambling mule, whose furniture was highly decorated, and whose bridle, according to the fashion of the day, was ornamented with silver bells. In this seat he had nothing of the awkwardness of the convent, but displayed the easy and habitual grace of a well-trained horseman. Indeed, it seemed that so humble a conveyance as a mule, in however good case, and however well broken to a pleasant and accommodating amble, was only used by the gallant monk for traveling on the road. A lay brother, one of those who followed in the train, had, for his use, on other occasions, one of the most handsome Spanish jennets ever bred at Andalusia, which merchants used at that time to import with great trouble and risk for the use of persons of wealth and distinction. The saddle and housings of the superb palfrey were covered by a long footcloth, which reached nearly to the ground, and on which were richly embroidered mitres, crosses, and other ecclesiastical emblems. Another lay brother led a sumpter mule, loaded probably with his superior's baggage, and 2 monks of his own order, of inferior station, rode together in the rear, laughing and conversing with each other without taking much notice of the other members of the cavalcade. The companion of the church dignitary was a man past 40, thin, strong, tall, and muscular, an athletic figure which long fatigue and constant exercise seemed to have left none of the softer part of the human form, having reduced the whole to brawn, bones, and sinews, which had sustained 1,000 toils and were ready to dare 1,000 more. His head was covered with a scarlet cap, faced with fur, of the kind which the French call motier, from its resemblance to the shape of an inverted mortar. His countenance was therefore fully displayed, and its expression was calculated to impress a degree of awe, if not fear, upon strangers. His high features, naturally strong and powerfully expressive, had been burnt almost into blackness by constant exposure to the tropical sun, and might, in their ordinary state, be said to slumber after the storm of passion had passed away. But the projection of the veins of the forehead, the readiness with which the upper lip and its thick black mustaches quivered upon the slightest emotion, plainly intimated that the tempest might be again and easily awakened. His keen, piercing, dark eyes told in every glance a history of difficulty subdued and dangers dared, and seemed to challenge opposition to his wishes, for the pleasure of sweeping it from his road by a determined exertion of courage and of will. A deep scar on his brow gave additional sternness to his countenance, and a sinister expression to one of his eyes, which had been slightly injured on the same occasion, and of which the vision, though perfect, was in a slight and partial degree distorted. The upper dress of this personage resembled that of his companion in shape, being a long monastic mantle, but the color, being scarlet, showed that he did not belong to any of the 4 regular orders of monks. On the right shoulder of the mantle there was cut in white cloth a cross of a peculiar form. This upper robe concealed what at first view seemed rather inconsistent with its form, a shirt, namely, of linked mail, with sleeves and gloves of the same, curiously plaited and interwoven, as flexible to the body as those which are now wrought in the stocking loom out of less obdurate materials. The forepart of his thighs, where the folds of his mantle permitted them to be seen, were also covered with linked mail. The knees and feet were defended by splints, or thin plates of steel, ingeniously joined upon each other, and mail hose, reaching from the ankle to the knee, effectually protected the legs, and completed the rider's defensive armor. In his girdle he wore a long and double-edged dagger, which was the only offensive weapon about his person. He rode not a mule, like his companion, but a strong hackney for the road, to save his gallant war-horse, which a squire led behind, fully accoutred for battle, with a chamfron or plaited headpiece upon his head, having a short spike projecting from the front. On one side of the saddle hung a short battle-axe, richly inlaid with damascene carving. On the other, the rider's plumed headpiece and hood of mail, with a long 2-handled sword, used by the chivalry of the period. A second squire held aloft his master's lance, from the extremity of which fluttered a small banderole, or streamer, bearing a cross of the same form with that embroidered upon his cloak. He also carried his small triangular shield, broad enough at the top to protect the breast, and from thence diminished to a point. It was covered with a scarlet cloth, which prevented the device from being seen. These 2 squires were followed by 2 attendants, whose dark visages, white turbans, and the oriental form of their garments showed them to be natives from some distant eastern country. The whole appearance of this warrior and his retinue was wild and outlandish. The dress of his squires was gorgeous, and his eastern attendants wore silver collars round their throats, and bracelets of the same metal upon their swarthy arms and legs, of which the former were naked from the elbow, and the latter from mid-leg to ankle. Silk and embroidery distinguished their dresses, and marked the wealth and importance of their master, forming at the same time a striking contrast with the martial simplicity of his own attire. They were armed with crooked sabres, having the hilt and baldric inlaid with gold and matched with Turkish daggers of yet more costly workmanship. Each of them bore at his saddle bow a bundle of darts, or javelins, about 4 feet in length, having sharp steel heads, a weapon much more in use among the Saracens, and of which the memory is yet preserved in the martial exercise called el yarid, still practiced in the eastern countries. The steeds of these attendants were in appearance as foreign as their riders. They were of Saracen origin, and consequently of Arabian descent, and their fine, slender limbs, small fetlocks, thin manes, and easy, springy motion formed a marked contrast with the large, jointed, heavy horses of which the race was cultivated in Flanders and in Normandy, for mounting the men-at-arms of the period in all the panoply of plate and mail, and which, placed by the side of those eastern coursers, might have passed for a personification of substance and of shadow. The singular appearance of this cavalcade not only attracted the curiosity of Wamba, but excited even that of his less volatile companion. The monk he instantly knew to be the prior of Jorvaulx Abbey, well known for many miles around as a lover of the chase, of the banquet, and, if fame did him not wrong, of other worldly pleasures still more inconsistent with his monastic vows. Yet so loose were the ideas of the time respecting the conduct of the clergy, whether secular or regular, that the prior Aymer maintained a fair character in the neighborhood of his abbey. His free and jovial temper, and the readiness with which he granted absolution from all ordinary delinquencies, rendered him a favorite among the nobility and principal gentry, to several of whom he was allied by birth, being of a distinguished Norman family. The ladies, in particular, were not disposed to scan too nicely the morals of a man who was a professed admirer of their sex, and who possessed many means of dispelling the ennui which was too apt to intrude upon the halls and bowers of an ancient feudal castle. The prior mingled in the sports of the field with more than due eagerness, and was allowed to possess the best trained hawks and the fleetest greyhounds in the North Riding, circumstances which strongly recommended him to the youthful gentry. With the old he had another part to play, which, when needful, he could sustain with great decorum. His knowledge of books, however superficial, was sufficient to impress upon their ignorance respect for his supposed learning, and the gravity of his deportment and language, with the high tone which he exerted in setting forth the authority of the Church and of the priesthood, impressed them no less with an opinion of his sanctity. Even the common people, the severest critics of the conduct of their betters, had commiserations with the follies of Prior Aymer. He was generous, and charity, as it is well known, covereth a multitude of sins, in another sense, that is which it is said to do so in Scripture. The revenues of the monastery, of which a large part was at his disposal, while they gave him the means of supplying his own very considerable expenses, afforded also those largesses which he bestowed among the peasantry, and which he frequently relieved the distresses of the oppressed. If Prior Aymer rode hard in the chase, or remained long at the banquet, if Prior Aymer was seen at the early peep of dawn to enter the postern of the abbey, as he glided home from some rendezvous which had occupied the hours of darkness, men only shrugged up their shoulders and reconciled themselves to his irregularities by recollecting that the same were practiced by many of his brethren who had no redeeming qualities whatsoever to atone for them. Prior Aymer, therefore, and his character, were well known to our Saxon serfs, who made their rude obeisance, and received his benedictive mefis in return. But the singular appearance of his companion and his attendants arrested their attention and excited their wonder, and they could scarcely attend to the prior of Jorvaulx's question, when he demanded if they knew of any place of harborage in the vicinity. So much were they surprised at the half-monastic, half-military appearance of the swarthy stranger and at the uncouth dress and arms of his eastern attendants. It is probable, too, that the language in which the benediction was conferred and the information asked sounded ungracious, though not probably unintelligible, in the ears of the Saxon peasants. "I ask you, my children," said the prior, raising his voice and using the lingua franca, or mixed language, in which the Norman and Saxon races conversed with each other, "if there are to be in this neighborhood any good man who, for the love of God and devotion to Mother Church, will give 2 of her humblest servants, with their train, a night's hospitality and refreshment, This he spoke with a tone of conscious importance, which formed a strong contrast to the modest terms which he thought it proper to employ. "Two of the humblest servants of Mother Church!" repeated Wamba to himself, but fool as he was, taking care not to make his observations audible. "I should like to see her St. Charles, her chief butlers, and her other principal domestics." After this internal commentary on the prior's speech, he raised his eyes and replied to the question which had been put. "If the Reverend Fathers," he said, "loved good cheer and soft lodging, a few miles of riding would carry them to the Priory of Brixworth. With their quality could not but secure them the most honourable reception. Or, if they preferred spending a penitential evening, they might turn down yonder wild glade, which would bring them to the hermitage of Campmerhurst, where a pious and Chouret would make them sharers for the night of the shelter of his roof and the benefit of his prayers." The prior shook his head at both proposals. "Mine honest friend," he said, "if the jangling of thy bells had not dizzied thine understanding, thou mightst know clericus clericum non decimat. That is to say, we churchmen do not exalt each other's hospitality, but rather require that of the laity, giving them thus an opportunity to serve God in honouring and relieving his appointed servants." "It is true," replied Wamba, "that I, being an ass, am nevertheless honoured to bear the bells as well as your reverence, mule. Notwithstanding, I did conceive that the charity of Mother Church and her servants might be said with other charity to begin at home." "A truce to thine insolence, fellow," said the armed rider, breaking in on his prattle with a high and stern voice, "and tell us, if thou canst, the road to— How called you your Franklin, Prior Aymer?" "Cedric," answered the prior. "Cedric the Saxon. Tell me, good fellow, are we near his dwelling, and can you show us the road?" "The road will be uneasy to find," answered Gurth, who broke silence for the first time. "And the family of Cedric retire early to rest." "Hush! Tell me not, fellow," said the military rider. "'Tis easy for them to arise and supply the wants of travellers, such as we are, who will not stoop to beg the hospitality which we have a right to command." "I know not," said Gurth sullenly, "if I should show the way to my master's house, to those who demand as a right the shelter which most are fain to ask as a favour." "Do you dispute with me, slave?" said the soldier, and setting spurs to his horse, he caused him to make a demivolt across the path, raising at the same time the riding rod which he held in his hand, with the purpose of chastising what he considered as the insolence of the peasant. Gurth darted at him a savage and revengeful scowl, and with a fierce yet hesitating motion laid his hand on the haft of his knife, but the interference of Prior Aymer, who pushed his mule betwixt his companion and the swineherd, prevented the meditated violence. "Nay, by Saint Mary, Brother Brian, you must not think you are now in Palestine, predominating over heathen Turks and infidel Saracens. We islanders love not blows, save those of Holy Church, who chasteneth whom she loveth. Tell me, good fellow," he said to Wamba, and seconded his speech by a small piece of silver coin, "the way to Cedric the Saxon's. You cannot be ignorant of it, and it is your duty to direct the wanderer, even when his character is less sanctified than ours." "In truth, venerable father," answered the jester, "the Saracen head of your right reverend companion has frightened out of mind the way home. I'm not sure I shall get there tonight myself." "Tush," said the abbot, "thou canst tell us if thou wilt. This reverend brother has been all his life engaged in fighting among the Saracens for the recovery of the Holy Sepulchre, and he is of the order of the Knights Templars, whom you may have heard of. He is half a monk, half a soldier." "If he is but half a monk," said the jester, "he should not be wholly unreasonable with those whom he meets upon the road, even if they should be in no hurry to answer questions that in no way concern them.
I forgive thy wit, replied the abbot, on condition thou wilt show me the way to Cedric's mansion.
Well then, answered Wamba, your reverences must hold to this path till you come to a sunken cross, of which scarce a cubit's length remains above ground. Then take the path to the left, for there are 4, which meet at the sunken cross, and I trust your reverence will obtain shelter before the storm comes on. The abbot thanked his sage adviser, and the cavalcade, setting spurs to their horses, rode on as men do who wish to reach their inn before the bursting of a night storm. As their horses' hooves died away, Gurth said to his companion,
If they follow thy wise direction, the reverend fathers will hardly reach Rotherwood this night.
No, said the jester, grinning, but they may reach Sheffield, if they have good luck, and it is a fit place for them. I am not so bad a woodsman as to show the dog where the deer lies, if I have no mind he should chase him.
Thou art right, said Gurth. It were ill that Eomer saw the Lady Rowena, and it were worse, it may be, for Cedric to quarrel, as is most likely he would, with this military monk. But like good servants, let us hear and see, and say nothing.
Thank you for joining me. Like and subscribe. For next week, Ivanhoe.